towards the end of the series. We are now into marketing and social media, which is, what's that, our 5th session. And then we've got another session next week where we'll look at event teams and succession planning. And then, of course, we have the recorded bite-size sessions, which I'm looking at recording those next week, and then all of these will be available to you at the end. So once again, that will cover off on accessible events, also looking at the COVID framework for Victoria. And I guess the reason I'm holding off on recording these is just to make sure that we've got the most up-to-date information. We're also going to look at site plans and tips on how to put together a good site plan, what council's expectations are, etc. And then we're also going to look into the new state government event planner tool, which is a really cool tool for you to be able to use for your event. And we're just going to take you through how to actually use that tool and get the best out of it for your event. So today we'll cover about 45 minutes, as always, to go through the content, and then I will open up for any discussion points if we have any. So today, what will we cover? We'll cover ideal event attendees and looking at who they are, what they are, how you profile them for your event, why it's so important to know who they are. We'll touch on how to identify your marketing objectives and KPIs. The focus I really want to drill in on today is how to get cut through in a very crowded marketplace. And I'm sure you're all familiar with that. There's so many options in terms of what to spend your marketing budget on. If you even have a marketing budget, which a lot of small events don't. And if they do, it can be quite small. Also going to touch on, how to have a bit of a coordinated approach to your marketing. And then we'll just look really quickly at your website and content marketing. Now, before I jump in, I think we've got all familiar names and faces, but those of you that don't know me, I'm Linda Tillman. I'm the Managing Director of Tourism and Events Agency Tillman Group and events training platform, Re-Events Academy. And I'm based in Southern Queensland, but I work across all of regional Australia, particularly along the East Coast, but also doing some work at the moment in Western Australia and the Northern Territory, which is quite fun. But if you want to find out anything else about me, please connect on LinkedIn, check out my websites, tillmagroup.com.au or reeventsacademy.com. Now, the whole purpose of these sessions, just before we jump into this, is really to give you some assistance in knowing how to most efficiently prepare a lot of this documentation that's required by local government. So all of these plans, we've talked about emergency management planning, risk management planning. We've talked about event management plans. Oh my God, I can't even remember what we talked about. Responsible event management. So all of these things that I guess are a requirement from a local and a state government perspective, and giving you a bit of, I guess, understanding of why they're so important, but more importantly, an appreciation of actually how to create the documentation. So today, marketing. This is probably one of the main questions from a marketing perspective that I would be asked by events across all parts of regional Australia, events of all different sizes and scale. But there's so many options available for marketing. How on earth are we to know what marketing activities to invest in to get the best bang for our buck, to get the best results? That's something I'm asked quite a lot. And the answer is, well, the answer's simple, but actually identifying who they are is actually quite an extensive process. So before you can actually determine where to invest your marketing, the very first thing you need to do, and one of the most important things to do, is to identify who your ideal event attendees are. Or you may be more familiar with your target market. I like to say ideal event attendees, and that's because not everyone is ideal for your event. So I want you to have a little think about and maybe ask yourself, are you currently getting the attendees that you want through the gate at your event? It's something, it's actually quite hard to answer. And a lot of people will answer, well, yeah, maybe there's some people we don't want. But in most instances, most people will think, yeah, okay, we're getting the people we want through our gate. And to be honest, some people don't even consider that question. You know, anyone that comes to our event pays, contributes to the local economy is great. It's not always the case. And what I want you to start thinking about is, who is your ideal event attendee? So this is a person that you want at your event for many reasons. So that could be they come every year, you know, they're advocates and they promote your event. They might offer really good feedback. You know, they bring their family and friends along each year. They align with the values of your event and maybe even the values of your community. So you need to think about, who is your ideal. They might be, you know, the highest yielding visitor. So they give you the most return for the investment. So just have a think about that. Who would be your ideal event attendee? Because not everyone is ideal for your event. And ultimately, what we want to start to do is attract more of the ideal event attendees to our event. And we can only do that if we have a really intimate understanding of who they are. Sorry, just have to admit somebody. So who is your ideal event attendee? Have a think about that. So what you need to be able to do is profile them. You probably already know a lot about them, and probably more than you actually think, because we live and breathe our events every year, but we don't necessarily document this. And this is marketing 101. We need to know our customer. We want to know their lifestyles, their attitudes, their interests, how they purchase things, where they live, where they travel, why they travel, what's important to them in life, what are their expectations, what are they actually seeking from an event? Is it to educate themselves? Is it just to rest? Is it to connect with family and friends? Or maybe it's to immerse in your local culture. So you really need to get to know your ideal event attendees well. And there's a few practical ways that you can do that. And the first thing I encourage you to do is just have a brainstorm with your team. You can also talk to your visitors face-to-face. So do some really, detailed surveys and interviews at your event. Find out what they're interested in, why they come to your event. You can also send out surveys to previous attendees. You can do, some more comprehensive post-event surveys with people. It's always cool to listen to any, conversations that might be happening online. So on your social media, your review sites. There's plenty of research out there, so you can look at all of your social data, your Google Analytics from your website. And Google Analytics is excellent. If you haven't yet got that set up on your website, and I'm going to talk about the website in a moment, but if you haven't got Google Analytics set up, I highly recommend that you do that ASAP. It can give you some really rich insights into the people that are actually looking at your website, which gives you some insight into the types of people that are interested in your event. You can also gather some research by talking to council. Council will often have some research. You can also, your regional tourism board, Tourism Research Australia, ABS. There's many different ways you can gather some research to get a bit more insight into your ideal event attendees. And basically you capture all of this insights, all of this intel, and you use it to create personas. What I've actually done is one of your templates as part of this particular masterclass or webinar is actually a template that will allow you to profile your ideal event attendees. So it'll just step you through a series of questions. It's quite challenging when you start to look at it, but persevere with it and sit down with a group of your team and just run through the questions and start to really think about who they are. It wants you to put some really detailed information in, which, as I said, can be challenging to start with, but it starts to paint a really interesting picture, because what you need to remember is you've only got a certain amount of budget to allocate to marketing. If you're just doing generic marketing to everybody, you're not going to get that cut through. So you need to understand who your ideal event attendees are, how to reach them, how they're purchasing tickets, all of those things, so that you can actually take more of a focused and targeted approach to your marketing, and then you're going to get those better outcomes for that investment. Excuse me. Now, who sets marketing objectives and KPIs? I know most of you will have like a business plan for your event, or you'll have a bit of a vision or some goals for your event about, you know, how much growth for your event, what you want to achieve in the next 3 years, etc. But what about from a marketing perspective? It's really interesting to sit down and start thinking about, what do we want to achieve from our marketing? And this is often aligned to your strategic plan. So if you have got a vision, if you've got some strategic goals for your event, then that's obviously going to be more of that umbrella vision. But then what you can do is start to look at your marketing. So it's really good to have tangible and measurable targets. And once again, that allows you to measure your success. So on the screen right now are just some examples of different marketing objectives and KPIs. And obviously these will be quite different for all events. And you'll have a series of them depending on what your marketing activity is and what you're trying to achieve for your event. So it could be things like, you know, hosting a sellout event, or, you know, attracting so many visitors to your festival, building up a Facebook audience, increasing unique visits to your website, developing a weekend package, and how many of those packages you sell. It could be how much media attention you get for your event. It can even be things like how much sponsorship support you receive. And if you can make them measurable, so comparing year on year. So for example, your website, rather than just saying, you know, we want to get, you know, 100 people to our website, it's really good to make that measurable. So you might say, you know, we want to attract 500 unique visits to our website for the 2 months leading up to the event. So then you can actually look at your Google Analytics and clearly see if you achieved that. Now, not only is this really good for you in terms of your planning and your ability to measure your success, but if you're applying for funding through Tourism Victoria, or even your local council, or even, you know, FRRR or Building Better Regions, any of those federal funds, they'll always want to know what your measurable targets are. So if you've got them documented, it's easy just to pull them out and use them for funding applications and proposals as well. Even your corporate sponsors, they want to know what you're striving to achieve. Now, I'm going to stay pretty high level here, but I just wanted to touch on this because it's quite important when we look at marketing for an event, that we're familiar with the 4 Ps of marketing. So I don't want to get too technical, But I just want to reinforce that marketing is about more than advertising and promotion. We often get so bogged down in, where are we going to advertise? How will we promote our event? We actually forget that there's other elements to marketing our event. And, in actual fact, I think there's 7 or 8 P's of marketing these days, but when I was at uni, there was 4 P's, and these are the 4 P's that I believe are the most relevant when we look at event marketing. So when you're thinking about marketing your event, you're thinking about your ideal attendee. So you can see there on the screen in the center, and always at the heart of any decisions you make with your marketing is your ideal event attendee. So you can't make any decisions unless you know who they are. Once you know who they are, you can start looking at these different things. You can look at the product. So you can think about the event program. You can think about the experience you're offering. You can think about the type of artists you're attracting to your event. You can think about, the timing of your event. Is it a night event? Is it a day event? That whole experience needs to align to your ideal event attendee. What are their expectations? What do they enjoy? What do they want to see at our event? Because you can promote the heck out of your event, but if the actual experience is not right, if the program is not right, you're going to waste a whole heap of time and money. So I often see events that say, well, you know what, we're going to use some of our marketing budget to attract or to engage a high profile artist to come and do workshops or performances at our event. And you know what, that's going to be a marketing hook for us, because that appeals to our ideal attendees. So rather than doing, $5,000 worth of promotion, we're going to put $5,000 into this artist, and that's going to help us attract our attendees. So your product or your experience is really important. Price is also really important. So thinking once again about your ideal attendees, is your event priced at the right price point? What about payment plans? Do you need to have things like student or senior discounts? Is that important to your ideal event attendees? And then place. So this is all about distribution channels. So where are your customers actually going to search for experiences or events, or to purchase tickets? Are they more traditional through, wanting to buy tickets through, reputable ticketing companies, or perhaps they like to buy tickets face-to-face at the local, visitor information centre, or maybe they're, I guess more digital savvy, and they actually prefer to buy them on the spot as soon as they hear about the event online or on Facebook or social media platforms. So you need to understand that about your ideal attendees. And finally, we have promotion. So this is your marketing and your advertising to reach your ideal event attendees. This is a thing that can be really difficult to determine the what, the where, and the how much, because there are so many options. So when you're considering the marketing for your event, I just want you to think about all of those things in any decision that you're making. Please always think about your ideal event attendee. Now, as I said at the start of the session today, one of the most common marketing questions I'm asked from events is where to invest their small budget to get the best return for the promotion that they do. So these are just some of the promotional channels that events have available for consideration. So you can see that there are so many options. You've got things like content creation. So, photos, video, graphics, creating blog articles, media releases. A lot of events don't actually take that into consideration and allocate budget to that. And often because it's not seen as something that will get results immediately for the first event, but you might invest in, let's say, this year's event to capture content that's going to help you with your marketing in future years. So always think about, what gaps do we have in our content? Do we need to, engage a photographer or a videographer to help us capture some fresh content for future marketing and promotion? Website management. So, you know, there's ongoing management, you know, refreshing your website, search engine optimization, Google Analytics. So how much budget needs to go into that? Then there's social media advertising. You can work with influencers. There are so many social media platforms these days. Do you actually know which social media platforms your ideal attendees are engaging on? There's digital advertising, so that's through Google Ads. You can do display advertising. You can do blog distribution. There's so many options through digital. PR and media, so that's, you know, doing a whole range of things with media for meals, influencers, doing a media launch, hosting media at your event. Traditional advertising is still quite important for some events. That's things like radio and print, even things like doing street banners, outdoor billboards, you know, advertising on the local coaches and buses traveling around the community. Many different opportunities in the traditional space, and then direct marketing and sales. So this includes things like electronic newsletter campaigns, attending face-to-face consumer shows. Not that we have the pleasure of that at the moment, but you know, that could be collaborating with council or other events, or even tourism bodies to actually attend those consumer shows. Mailbox drops and cold calling, not necessarily something we do a lot for events, but certainly an opportunity. So you can see that there are so many options available to events. It's important to really understand where your ideal event attendee is going to see your messages, and that will give you, or will assist you in ensuring maximum return on your investment for your marketing spend. For me, when I look at events, I always recommend, particularly events that I work with that don't have a huge budget, I always suggest, you know, a good mix of PR. I really love PR and media, and also digital and social media for events, because it's affordable. And if it's done well, it can actually generate really good outcomes. I'm actually just working with an event in Queensland at the moment, and they engage a PR agency in Brisbane. So they actually invest, I think it's $8,000 to $10,000 a year. So I know that's a lot for some small events, but this event attracts about 20,000 or maybe 15 to 20,000 a year in regional Queensland, and they spend around the $25,000 a year on marketing. So fairly significant for a regional event. In saying that, they do get state government funding to help pay for that. But I just wanted to share this example because it really shows the power of working with PR. So they work with the PR agency. This agency is professional, so they pitch all the stories to media, etc., on behalf of the event. So $8,000 to $10,000 investment each year. They've actually been featured on Sunrise. They've had an hour interview with ABC Brisbane. They've been on a whole heap of foodie magazines and blogs because it's a food-related event. So they would have got, I don't know the actual figures, but if you were to look at the advertising equivalent of their PR exposure over a year, it would easily be over $1 million in exposure for an $8,000 investment in a PR agency. So not too bad at all. I know not everybody can afford it, but if you can, it's certainly a really good option for events, because events are great stories and media love them. We can look at backstories, we can talk about our people, you know, there's some really beautiful stories in events. So they lend themselves really well to media and PR, and also the digital space. So when we talk about working with media, there's a number of ways that you can do it. So you don't need to engage an external agency. You might want to jump in and do it yourself. So you can do things like pitching news items. And it's really important to make sure that they're newsworthy. And that's why working with a PR agency can be useful, because they know what the newsrooms are looking for. We often in our own little bubbles think we know what they're looking for, but often it's not the case at all. And they get hit with so many different pitches for stories each day. It's really important to make sure you stand out. So think about what are those really interesting newsworthy stories, and they usually love human interest stories. So I find with events that I work with, we often look for those backstories. So, who are even about, the team, the volunteers, the local community, trying to find those links and backstories are often really appealing to the media. You can do things like a media launch, and these work really well. I've worked with a number of events where we've done 100-day launch events. And we make an event of it. So it's a really good milestone as well to kick off your marketing campaign or your promotional activity. So you can go, okay, 100 days out from our event, we have our media launch. And that might be the day that your tickets go on sale. That's the day that your website's all up to date, your program's released. It's a really significant milestone for your event. And it also gives you a really good reason to host some media at that time. So you might put on a little taste of your event and invite some media along to actually do some interviews and capture some stories to help promote the fact that the event is 100 days away. Influencer takeovers. So these are where you engage social media influencers to actually take over your social media accounts in the lead up to your event. And once again, really important to know your audience before you go down this path, because you want to make sure that any influencers that you work with are talking to the same audience. Because ultimately what you're trying to do is to use this influential person to try to attract a new audience to your event. So trying to draw some of their followers to your event, and also trying to build that desire to actually attend the event. So they create a bit of FOMO. Familiarizations, or famils as we call them, we like to do these, but once again, it's hard for events to really get their head around how to get value from famils, because you'll do a famil, let's say at this year's event, you'll invite media to your event. Typically you'll cover some of their costs to do that, but then you'll get stories after the event. So it's not so much about that immediate conversion for this year's event. It's more about building brand awareness, building profile, so that people start to consider your event for future years. You can also include media at your event. I know ABC Radio, particularly in areas that I've worked in, they like to do outside broadcasts. So they can do an outside broadcast from your event. We've seen Sunrise doing their weather show from different events. So there's opportunity to think about how do we bring media into our event. Also, they can, radio announcers make the best MCs because they've got such a great voice. So just think about local radio announcers and getting them involved in your event, because usually if they're involved in your event, they'll talk about it when they're on air in the lead up to your event, which is all free publicity. And then you can obviously live stream or broadcast your event. And these days you can actually just do that quite cheaply through social media. But you obviously can also invest more heavily if you want to look at getting that done professionally. As I said before, if you do have the budget, this is definitely an area that I suggest you outsource to a specialist. It can be really effective for events, but it can also be, quite time consuming if you don't have the skills and capacity to actually do it. So you just consider, let's just say it was $8,000 to engage a media agency, that's an $8,000 promotional cost. So it's just about thinking about marketing as being more holistic. It's not just about, advertising on TV or advertising on the local radio. Which is why I guess it's so hard these days, because there's so many so many ways to promote your event, and it's so noisy out there, right? There's so many marketing messages. Everybody's promoting. It's so competitive, that space, which is why we want to try to create loyal followers, because then we have word of mouth, and word of mouth is the most powerful form of advertising and promotion we could ever have. Now, I just want to talk briefly about your website. This is the hub of all of your marketing, not just your digital marketing, any marketing that you do. So it's really important to make sure that your website is up to date. First of all, you need to consider, do you have a website? And if you don't have a website, please consider investing in a website. Websites these days are not as expensive as they used to be, and they don't have to be, big flash, flashy screens with, 10 or 20 pages. It might just be a couple of pages or one page of information, but you want to be able to be found online. So you need to think about, is your website up to date? You want to consider who manages your website. Is there somebody in your local community perhaps that has the necessary skills to do that for you? Or is that an investment that will be required for the event? If you're going to invest in anything for marketing and you've got one option with a very small budget, I would invest in your website. Because as you can see here, all of your other promotion, everything. So even when people are talking about you online that you don't often know about, you want to make sure people can find you. Because what's the first thing people do if someone else mentions your event, if they hear it on the radio, if they see it come across their computer for whatever reason, the first thing people will do is search Google. And they'll search Linda Tillman's Festival because they've just heard it. So you want to make sure that people can find you. Now, I often get asked, well, can I just have a Facebook page? And a Facebook page will come up in Google most of the time. However, I don't recommend being dependent on a Facebook page as your only online presence. And the reason for that is because, as we've seen, particularly in recent years, Facebook can actually close down whatever pages they like. They can make changes just like that, and you could lose all of your followers. So you have no control over Facebook, or very limited control over Facebook. So it can be quite risky, and you don't want to put all of this energy into, building up an audience and, doing your ticket sales on Facebook and having everything on Facebook, and then something really drastic happens. So look into having just a really simple website that promotes your event, that can be found on Google, and that's going to just make sure that you're able to be found when anybody's doing any of those searches. And I guess the key with that then is, once you have a website that's working well for you, is then whenever you do any other promotion, you want to start to direct people back to your website to take action. So that's what I mean about the website being the hub. If you're doing, anything on radio, for example, you're going to say, find more information on our website. Anything you do on social media, you're going to link them back to your website. So always making sure you're bringing people back to your website as your hub, and then making sure that's always up to date. That will give you that funnel of followers to actually create the opportunity to convert them, whether that's ticket sales or, signing up to your newsletter, whatever that may be. Now, the other really key thing, so we've got PR, which I've talked about. So working with media, it's a really effective way of promoting an event. The other really effective way of promoting an event is through content marketing. And I guess it's for the same reasons. Events are fun to talk about. They're fun. People love events. They're colourful, they're bright. And, you know, content marketing is really all about storytelling. It's about creating valuable, relevant content that appeals to your audience, to your ideal attendees. So this has been quite trendy for a while now. It's no longer new, but it's something that works really well for events, but once again, needs to be done quite well. So these are just some of the types of content. You've got website content. You can do blog posts, so, you know, writing articles. And sometimes I say if you've got a media release, that can also transfer into a blog post, but I'll touch on that a little bit in a moment. You've also got content in your electronic newsletters. You can create itineraries and packages around your event. That's content. Reviews and testimonials. So when people are doing reviews and testimonials, you can actually take those and repurpose them as your own content. And then photo and video. So it might be your own photo and video that you've had created for the event, or it could be third party or someone that's attended your event that's sharing photos and videos as well. And that's all content. So this is all stuff that you can be using to help promote your event. And it's all about how do you use it? And it's using it through your social media channels, using it through your website. And this is where it can get a little bit complicated and quite overwhelming. But this is where we talk about having a content plan. So actually making sure you've got a plan that outlines what content you're going to share, when and where. You can also repurpose content. So this is kind of taking it to another level. But this is what saves time, because one of the things that's really hard with social media or content marketing is just having the time to write something, even if it's something little. So I always say to people, look at repurposing your content. So you can create one blog post, which you can see here on the left. So the top 10 Aussies to take on the world. That was a blog article. Then we used it in a newsletter, which is this one in the middle. So we just took that and we wrote it a little bit different, but used the same content. And then we take that and we use it on social media. And you can see here on social media, we're actually linking back to the website. So we link back to this blog article. We give them a little teaser and we link back. So it's not always about creating new content. One piece of content can be used in many, many ways. So it's just thinking about what are those stories that you can tell about your event? Like I was saying with media, what are those newsworthy stories? What are the backstories? And thinking about writing some stories and then sharing it, distributing, repurposing. And it's just this constant message, this flow of relevant information going out to your ideal attendees. Now, one of the most significant content marketing tools, one of the ways that we can actually distribute our content is through social media. And this is an absolute beast, if you like. You know, we could spend a whole day talking about social media and it can be quite overwhelming in terms of how to do it. The number of changes, it's a real difficult tool to navigate if you don't have a plan in place. And that's the number one thing I always suggest to events, is just to think about having a plan, a content plan, so you know what you're going to put out when and where. So before you can gain maximum benefit from social media, these are just a few things I want you to consider. You need to consider why you're using social media. And this goes back to your marketing objectives and your KPIs. So why are you doing it? What do you want to achieve from social media? Is it about building brand awareness? Is it about selling tickets? Is it about attracting more followers and directing them to your website? Why are you using social media? You need to understand what your messages will be and when you'll distribute them. So being really strategic and focused. So this is where that plan comes into play. You don't need to say everything at once, and you don't need to post a million things a week. You might just think really clearly across, say, a 3-month period leading into your event. You might go, okay, we're going to do 1 post a day or 3 or 4 posts a week. And you just map it out on a calendar and say, these are the important things that we need to talk about. And then you start to look at, well, what are the other engaging things? So you've got your important things, then you've got some engaging content. So that could be some backstories, you know, some fun stuff, because you've got to remember social media, it's social, right? It's designed to be fun. It's designed to be engaging. It's not a tool where you're just constantly pushing sales and selling tickets and really, you know, heavy promotional content. You've got to get that really nice mix. I always encourage people to check out what others are doing. And think about how you can be a bit different. So look at what your competitors are doing. Have a look at what other events across the region. You might have events that you benchmark against, and you might have a look at their social media channels. Get a feel for what's working really well. You can learn from that, but you can also make sure that you're doing something a bit different. Make sure that your website is always up to date and that it's ready to convert. And what I mean by that is, if you're going to do social media and you're going to encourage people to come to your website, make sure your website's ready to capture them. So do you want them to buy tickets? Do you want them to subscribe to your newsletter? So it's like this funnel. You know, your funnel starts at the top and you're doing all your promotion, you know, you're getting them interested and you're starting to move them down the bottom of the funnel. And at the bottom of the funnel is your website or your conversion point on your website. What is that? Is it buying tickets, subscribing to your newsletter? It could be calling you for something. You know, what's that thing you want people to do? I also encourage you to set up an email marketing program if you haven't already, because then you have the opportunity to build a database of your own potential attendees. So there's this whole thing in marketing where it's, you know, your own marketing channels and third-party or borrowed marketing channels. So I'll give you an example. Facebook is a borrowed marketing channel. So you don't own that. You don't have control over that. It can be taken away from you at any time. But if you have a database that people subscribe to through something like MailChimp, you own that. That is your audience. So whoever subscribes to that, you have control over how you communicate to them, how you market to them, unless they unsubscribe, of course. But you have control over that. Nobody can take that away from you. So I always encourage events, even if you just start really gently, but look into MailChimp. There is a free option. It does progress then to paid, but it allows you to actually have a section on your website where people can subscribe, and then you can directly market to them and keep them up to date on your event. I'd also like to see blogs on websites, because you can put photos up on your blog. You can put really brief articles. You don't have to be a journalist and write, you know, really long stories. But the good thing about that is it's fresh content going on your website all the time. So it keeps it ranking really high on Google, but it also keeps your audience engaged. And it gives you something then to share through your social media channels. And probably one of the hardest things is to find someone to coordinate your social media. You may have somebody in your community that has an interest in it and has the necessary skills to be able to invest the time and energy to help in this area. If not, there's plenty of companies out there you can pay people to do it, but it's not It's not a cheap thing, because it does take a lot of time and strategic thinking to get good outcomes from it. So maybe think about, are there young people in your community that enjoy social media that might be able to get involved through work experience or internships? That can often work. So I'm going to go back again to our ideal event attendees and just reinforce. You need to make sure that you're focusing on the channels. So when we talk about social media, focus on the channels where your ideal event attendees are playing. And what I mean by that is, are they on Facebook or are they on Instagram? Or if you've got a younger ideal attendee, like millennials, they might be on Snapchat or TikTok, one of those more younger social media platforms. So you need to make sure you know where your audience is, so you're not wasting time in other areas. Now, just wanted to give everyone an update. Don't forget, there's also great free promotional opportunities for events. So these are things that you should be doing no matter what. Talk to council about being listed on the events calendar on council's website and even on local tourism website. Council usually will have social media channels, whether they're the council channels and or their tourism channels. Look to provide content so that they can promote your event through those channels. The Australian Tourism Data Warehouse, you want to make sure that you're listed on the Australian Tourism Data Warehouse. You may have heard of it referred to as ATDW. It is currently free for events in Victoria. So jump on there. Basically what that does is it distributes your event. You input your event once and it actually distributes that listing across multiple tourism and event websites to get that listing distributed far and wide. There's also the Accredited Visitor Information Centre network across your regions. So if you do have posters, you can always distribute them through that network. Then you've also got your regional tourism board, and it's just about keeping these different stakeholders up to date. So sending them regular bits of information, some photos, video content, and they can help promote your event. And if council does a newsletter, which some councils do a regular e-newsletter, or some even do a printed newsletter, also see whether there's an opportunity for you to be promoted within that. And just talk to your local council representative and find out what other opportunities may exist locally to actually promote your event. And use local businesses, other tourism operators, any of your sponsors. They're all opportunities to help spread the word about your event. So although I've talked a lot about, I guess more formal or traditional promotional channels, there's lots of ways you can actually distribute information about your event that's quite affordable if you've got the time to do it. And that's where collaboration is so important. So this is all about creating partnerships to extend your budget further. So once again, talking to the local council, the regional tourism board, partnering with any sponsors that you may have, and media and influencers. So always sending out information to them. If your event does attract visitors to your local community and your tourism operators get benefit from that, so accommodation operators, restaurants and cafes, then send some information to them as well and say, hey, can you help promote this through your networks? Business chamber. It's just knowing who those stakeholders are that are relevant to your event, and looking at ways to actually leverage off them to promote your event. And look, 99% of the time, organisations like this will be more than happy to promote a local community event. And just my final message, if you can't measure it, you can't improve on it. So one of the most important things with marketing after knowing your ideal attendee, is to make sure that you always review, you measure, you analyze, and you improve. So whatever you do at your event, make sure you've got ways to actually measure how effective they are. So set those objectives and KPIs and measure how much they worked. Why did they work? Did you get results through social media, or maybe it came more, you know, through local radio, for example? You want to be able to try to measure that so that you can continue to improve on your marketing each year. Because like I said, right at the start, we have very little budget and so many options. So we want to start to distill down where we're getting the best return for our investment in our marketing activity. And that's all I have for you today. Could talk about marketing all day. It was really hard to actually determine what to focus on in this topic because it is such a big topic. But I hope that that's just given you some really good thought provokers and some really important things to consider when you're looking at your marketing. And social media it's a big one. But we've given you some good resources, templates that will be able to help guide you in doing the planning, which is one of the most important parts of social media. Does anyone have any questions? No. The chat's been a bit quiet today as well. Hope I haven't overwhelmed you too much.
You have.
Does anyone have a marketing person on their team, or is it something that is the responsibility of you amongst many other things? Because that's often the challenge is, you know, with events in general, I guess, is just having the team to actually divide up the roles and responsibilities. And that's, you know, if you can find people that can take on that responsibility, that have an interest in marketing or a background in marketing that can do this for you, then I guess that's the best outcome. Because if it's one of many things that you're required to do, we know that we can't do everything well when we're overloaded. So start looking in your community and see if there's anybody that can assist and support. Well, we will call that a day. I really appreciate everyone's time. And I look forward to seeing everybody next Monday, actually. Now I'm doubting myself. It's actually next Wednesday. Thanks, Nicole. So next week, we've got our final session on the 20th, and we're looking at event teams and succession planning. So I look forward to seeing everybody then.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.